All right. Welcome back to another episode of Zen and Call Signs. I have a friend of mine, Andrew Beard, on. I taught this guy how to fly the V-22, basically. And so I thought it was going to have a unique perspective, but and he comes from a unique background as well from the COD or C2 E2 community. He's spent a good bit of time in the Navy as a pilot, flying all around the world, and in leadership positions. So I think he would be a unique person to bring on and to share his background and experience for authentic conversation. Um, and with that, I'd like to, start off with a couple questions. So, Andrew, if you'd like to just share a little bit about yourself, so everybody can get an idea of who you are, and then we'll go off with some questions and your why behind the why.
Sure. Thanks for having me on, Blake. The I joined the Navy out of high school. I went to the Naval Academy. After graduating there, I started flight school, kind of a typical C2 pilot track, all the various career milestones leading up
By
to
chance,
command of.
did you have to pay anybody to get the C2 route versus the other route? Because I know I've heard of that happening because the lifestyle of C2 guys is pretty great. Is that true?
I've heard of that as well. Our class put our ID cards into a trash can. No
Oh,
kidding,
no
a
shit.
trash can. And one of the guys who wanted E2s held it up, and another guy who wanted E2s picked them out one by one, and the first four got C2s, and I was one of
Okay.
the lucky first four.
Nice. Is that your first pick out of pilot training? Is that what you wanted?
No, when I was going through flight school, I thought, the Navy flies, I forget what the calculation was at the time, but I said 40% pointy nose and 40% helicopters. Either one of those sounds fine for me. So I put pointy nose and helicopters, and they came back and said, congrats, you're going to be an E2 or C2 pilot. And I went, uh-oh, broke out my Janes and had to find out what that was.
Well, sorry, backing up a little bit from when we chatted however many months ago, I think you wanted to be a Marine for a little while, and I'm curious if you can share a little bit of that story of how that changed, because I think that's a unique perspective and a unique thought behind it. Because it's very like it's deep, and it's like maybe you made a better decision than me, maybe, but I don't.
So you're digging up nuggets here that a lot of people don't know in my life. Yeah, you are absolutely right. So when I was at the Naval Academy, I went back and forth, didn't know what I wanted to do. I think the our senior year, we do these different takes where we put in our preferences all the way up until kind of the final selection. And I'll tell you what, I rotated through almost all the different specialties that there were. There were a few I didn't put up there, but a lot of them kind of rotated through. I ended on uh, wanting to go Marine aviation or Marine ground, and then Navy pilot was my third choice, and was selected for Navy pilot. So there there are a few reasons that I could sort of point to why, or maybe what happened behind the scenes to sort of get to that process, but it's all speculation. In the end, it worked out for me. I'm happy where I am, and haven't really looked back. I'll tell you though, the Marine Corps, I did have the chance to experience uh, through a program called Leatherneck, and then
Yeah.
some experience with the Fleet Marine Force, a couple of weeks with Second Marine Recon, and then 2 weeks with a Harrier unit down in Cherry Point, and just loved the time down there. And there was a lot of my experience that just really resonated with me. The esprit de corps, the camaraderie. There was just something different about the Marine Corps that I wanted to be a part of. So That's what attracted me to it. Unfortunately, it didn't work out. I'll just be honest with you. I don't think I would be, well, I definitely wouldn't be where I am today, but I wouldn't have, I don't think I would have stuck around. I don't see my path unfolding, just kind of what I know about the Marine Corps now and, um, some perspective on it. I think like you,
Sure.
I probably would have had a similar path to your own where I did some stuff and probably would have just left after that.
Yeah. Um, I think it's in the Marine Corps, it's very difficult when you are like at your core contrarian and question everything. It's hard to, I'm not saying, I always think of it as like, hey, charge that pillbox. And you're like, hey, I'll do that. But is there like a way to go around? Because it seems like everybody's dying right there, and I don't know if it makes the most sense. Like, I will kill all those guys. But is there like a way, like I can still live? Because and they're like the fuck out of here. Um, but yeah, I thought that was interesting perspective. Do you think that's? I think it, fate. You mentioned you had your I forgot what you had. Your basically your active duty guy there. Is it fate or he helped or he maybe knew you better than you knew yourself to get whatever that was. But I feel like that's how it works sometimes. So for out of the Naval Academy, so pilot training, you got C2s. Um, you have any like flying experience? So what's your perspective on flying in the sense of like I think there's a lot of uncertainty and how have you managed uncertainty? Because I know the C2s you're operating, very long distances from shore to ship. I don't know, I don't forgot that what you guys would the max you could do 600 miles, 800. I'm not sure, but in
Close
that
to a
realm,
thousand.
okay, okay, yeah, yeah, that's quite a ways. Of a lot of uncertainty. Do you have a culminating moment or situation that's interesting, good, bad, or ugly, from your flying experience?
I wouldn't say a moment. I think as I matured in the community, you get exposed to more and more situations through either your own experience or hearing, what happens to your friends and, other people as they go through certain failures or they're put into decisions that you hadn't thought of before.
Yeah.
And I think that certainly shaped a lot of my thinking and a lot of my risk calculations. When I first started out, I assume that you're the same way, but I think in general, you assume the equipment's going to work, you assume everything's going to be fine because most of the time it is. And you study these scenarios and you go through these emergencies procedures and you try and put everything together, and it's sort of abstract until it's not, until you're put into a situation, you have to make a decision. And that is, that starts to shape, who you are, at least for me. I'll say that one of the experiences that a friend of mine had that, I was not a part of, and it was after I'd left my initial tour in the C2 Greyhound. I was instructing. I ended up meeting up with his friend, and he was flying the C2 on the Pacific route, trying to catch up with the carrier. So he had been left behind. The plane had broken in Hawaii, and so the carrier kept going, and he had to fly from Hawaii to Midway, Midway to Wake, Wake to Guam,
Yeah.
with some extra fuel tanks on board in order to sort of do that. And what you're talking about there is you're talking about a lot of open water. You're talking about no communication with anyone for hours and hours on end. Maybe your HF radio is working. You're able to talk to somebody back in like San Francisco or over in Asia, and you're able to give them the old PTA, PTP. But he was about halfway between. I think it was Midway and Wake, if I don't if I remember this correctly, and one of his hydraulic systems just failed. And the hydraulic pump is not one you can turn off. So If it had truly failed, he wasn't sure if it was the gauge or if it was the pump, but it's something that if
Yeah.
it truly failed, it's going to still keep spinning and potential fire. And he's looking at the situation where he has to continue for 2 hours one way, or he can turn around 2 hours the other way. And he's not talking to anyone. He had lost contact with anyone, so no one knew where he was. I mean, that was it.
Yeah.
And hearing him tell me about this, brought the reality of like, wow, we do a lot of things in the plane and we push a lot of situations that you're not really ready for. You haven't thought through, and maybe push is the wrong word, but you're put in
Right.
those situations. It's not like he took off with that condition. He was confronted with it, but it's something that gave me pause, and that was something I sort of came back to later on in my career when I was thinking about some of the longer range missions. And hey, what do you do?
Yeah.
Can we go a different route so that we're at least in range and can talk to people, or have diverts that are at least an hour away, vice 2 hours away? I mean,
Yeah.
these scenarios where you are, the plane, the C2 is a great airplane, but it doesn't get super high. The communication suite is pretty dated. It's 1980s technology, HF radio.
Yeah.
So you can go hours without talking to somebody. That can be frightening. It's liberating, but it's also a little
Yeah.
frightening.
Speaking of like situations, I don't know why this came to mind, but do you think that, some people are just lucky because they're more discerning, they're more thoughtful, and then, that goes, thoughtful, and then luck meets them. Because I feel like I was very lucky flying the V-22, and I don't know why I was thinking of like, feel like you were lucky flying. I mean, how you have 3,000, like how many hours do you have flying right now?
About 3,500.
Right. So, I mean, where do you think those two intersect? And like, do you think luck is a superpower?
Luck is definitely a superpower. I I do believe that sometimes you make your own luck. I've seen a lot of people who they start to take things for granted. They start to take that lack of a negative result or the continued negative result, and they'll say like they they broke a rule, they pushed something that they probably shouldn't have, nothing bad happened, and they take that as like, well, I can just do this now, and
Yeah.
then they start
Yeah.
to normalize that deviance, right?
Yeah.
And you can't do that. You're going to be put in situations, equipment's going to fail, there's going to be environmentals, there's going to be things that happen to you, and how you deal with that is you know maybe luck of the draw, maybe partially your decision making, there's a lot of different factors that come into it. At the end of the day, as long as you did everything leading up to that the right way,
Yeah.
then I think you've done the best that you can,
Yeah.
and luck is absolutely part of it. There are a small percentage of people that make those mistakes and put themselves and drive themselves into those situations where they're flying with known degraded equipment. They're flying into sketch conditions that they shouldn't be. They're pushing the envelope. And
Yeah.
to those people, I say, luck is not a superpower.
Yeah. No.
You're on borrowed time.
Yeah. Agreed. Yeah, I would agree with that. So, with that being said, and those kinds, I feel like you will never get rid or have everybody think like that. So do you have any kind of leadership thoughts or times where you're a junior interacting with someone senior with you, or that you'd like to share, or vice versa in that realm? Like that you had either they were difficult or something unique from a leadership perspective with regard to like, hey, I see something wrong and I'm going to say something. So anything.
I am the wrong person to ask for that.
Like
I didn't listen to a lot of people when I was junior. I had a lot of people that were senior to me that I did not look up to, didn't respect, didn't agree with the decisions that they made uh, for a variety of reasons, and just generally didn't care what they had to say because it didn't matter to me. It was they had already proven themselves either incompetent or not really worthwhile. And I think I'm trying to be better than that as I have had those different leadership positions to take people and try and explain the why, try and explain my thought process. So it's not just here's the decision, let's go do it. To me, that's always been important. And I think that that's resonated with the people that I've served with.
Yeah.
I want to say that it's, you know, to me, leadership is about, for the most part, is about those one-on-one connections, those small group settings. This isn't stuff that you put out in front of 200, 300 people. This is, when I'm talking about like piloting and airmanship and decision making, it's small groups. It's letting them in. It's being vulnerable. It's explaining that, yeah, there was a decision that I made back, at this point in my career, and that may not have been the right decision. And just because I've made rank and I've been here doesn't mean that that was the right decision then either. But you have to be honest about it, and that's part of our culture in naval aviation.
When because that, like, when you're wrestling with, like, as a junior officer, and you're wrestling with, like, hey, I'm pretty sure this guy's wrong, or something's off. How did you? Because I think that is not usual, which kind of should be, but like, you're questioning, whatever guy out, a couple, he's been in 5, 10 extra years, and like, you're questioning, you're like, he's like, oh, okay, so I either think he's incompetent, he's like, something in there. So do you think in that, is that, I feel like that's different. And like, how did you wrestle with that? Because were you thinking like, am I fucked up? Like, am I, something's wrong? Is something wrong with me? Because there's nobody else thinking this. And so, like, how did you, and then were you just, but because I figure you're very analytical, and you're like, you thought like, hey, is it me? But then where did you get the inside, I guess, fire or thought to be like, no, I'm not doing that. That's not right. Where do you get that?
When I was junior, I had a small cadre of folks on each of my deployments and most of those tough situations that were like-minded, and I leaned on them. And I was open kimono. I told them everything. I mean, really insubordinate stuff. Just, I mean, no holds barred, right? And they thought the same way. They saw the same things. They thought the same way. So I wasn't alone, and that was
Yeah.
helpful. As I've gone up the ranks, so to speak, it's been a lot lonelier, and it's not as you don't have those trusted people that you turn to. But what I learned was that I would say that first tour to tour and a half gave me the confidence to be able to just like make those decisions, make those assessments, and then I don't need that validation anymore. I can just make that decision
Yeah.
and say
Yeah.
that person doesn't know what they're talking about. I don't care what they have to say. And
Yeah.
I'll say this as well. One of the things that it taught me, having my first tour be very, I would say that was a lot of what defined it, was that there were a lot of senior folks. I would say most of the senior folks I did not look up to. I did not respect. I didn't listen to them. They didn't know what they were talking about. Um, and that taught me to start to look at people differently. And I would listen to what people had to say and not look at what rank they were wearing. So it didn't matter whether the idea was coming from, the most junior sailor, or, all the way up to, the upper echelons. I listened to what their ideas were. Were they based in fact? Was there sound analysis behind them? What was their judgment? And that's how I started to build my group of trusted advisors, whether it was mechanics, technicians, whether it was
Yeah.
fellow pilots. And it was the haves and have nots. And I hate to say that, but you know,
Yeah.
the have nots could always come in. It's okay to make a mistake. Let's talk about it. Let's talk through that. It's okay to do things, but it was the people who did that in a negligent way and just said like, well, I don't care what the rules are. I'm just going to go do this, or I'm going to
Yeah.
do it this way because that's how I was taught. And it's like, that's not the right answer.
Have you? because you seem to strike a balance between, let's say IQ and EQ, where, you have, computer science background, masters in that. So very analytical mind, very, very smart, right? Very smart. Like you have great memory, in that sense. You remind me of a couple of friends of mine. But also like that soft skill, like, the EQ, emotional intelligence, how have you found balance between the two? Because it seems like you have.
That's a great question. I'm not sure if I have a great answer for that. I think early on I sought the computer science route. I sought um, math and sciences because those were things, especially in school, there were right answers. To me, coding was fun. Computers were fun. They were easy, and other people didn't think so. So it was fun and easy, and therefore, why not take it? Uh, One of the things that always fascinated me was, this concept of leadership of working with people towards a common goal of doing something that you may not want to do and trying to make the best of it. And I think that was something I picked up from my dad
Mm.
as I was growing up. And that was one of the things that attracted me to go to the Naval Academy. Was honestly, it was I did an overnight experience and I saw what they did there. And that was different. That was different than all the other college experiences I had had, visiting different schools. And I did it and I was like, that's it. I'm sold. That's where I'm going.
Yeah.
I think it probably would have been a similar experience at any of the military institutions, to be honest with you. But uh, that's sort of what did it for me. And so I, it's funny. We've spent the first I don't know how many minutes talking about piloting stuff. I most of the time don't define myself as a pilot. Don't think of myself as a pilot. I think of myself first and foremost as a naval officer, as someone in the Navy who has you know and I look forward to those leadership challenges because that to me is what's interesting. Helping people, working through challenges, working through personnel issues, as frustrating as they may be, that to me is the good stuff. The flying is nice, it's gravy, it's fun, it's God, it's fun. But, you know, that's not what does it for me.
Yeah. Well, I think that was well said. Did you have a background, military, like your parents, family, military background? Did that partly draw you in or no?
Well, both my grandfathers served in World War II. My mom's dad was a Marine, both enlisted. My dad's dad was in the Army, and my dad served in the Navy as well. He went to the Naval Academy and then served as a surface warfare officer. So I grew up around the Navy tradition and other alumni and things like that. That was a big
So,
factor. And yeah, there's no way I would have been uh, thought of the Academy. It wouldn't have been on my radar at all had it
mm,
not been for
well,
him and the influence.
interesting. So I feel like you had that. Maybe the EQ side was like, because I think that I had my dad wasn't in the military, but both of my grandfathers were in Vietnam, and so I had an incredible experience with them, both of them as my surrogate dads at different times. I spent a lot of time with them, and they certainly influenced me and how I think now, and you know how I think of myself as a leader. When I was in the Marine Corps, and how I did things. Period. Um, and it's similar. It's like in the Marine Corps where it's like everybody's a Marine. You're a Marine officer, Marine platoon commander, and then you're everything else. Then everything else is secondary. And I think that's a good way to think about things.
I love that, by
Um,
the way. That is one of the things that attracted me to the Marine Corps. Every Marine or rifleman, every Marine officer is a rifle platoon commander, and
yeah.
it's that basis that binds the entire Marine Corps together. And I mean it's so apparent to me, even 20 years later as I serve with Marines and still reconnect with Marines.
Yeah.
There's just something there that the other services don't have that. The Navy certainly doesn't. I don't see it in the Air Force. Obviously I haven't served in the Air Force or the Army, but the other services don't have that. I would say that from what I know about the Coast Guard, they're kind of close as well. They have
Yeah.
that surface kind of mindset. They all start out on ships and then some go different different ways as well. But they have that sort of forcing, that funneling mechanism that brings everyone together. It says, this is our purpose. This is who we are. They have that identity. In the Navy, we have, hundreds of identities.
Yeah, it is interesting. I think that's even like what your rank is. It's like your AW of something. It's like it's just that's your identity or something like that. Because spending the past almost 3 years at a Navy command, obviously from meeting you, it was very opening coming from Marine Corps to working as a Navy contractor. So but it's good. I liked because I'm like out of the Marine Corps. I'm chill. It's all good. Hey, bro, what's up? All right. So going into that, so I'd love to get your perspective since you're, very analytical guy. So you spent 3,000 hours or more, 3,500 almost, something like that, flying fixed wing, flying the C2, a prop. And then, and I feel like, and as we chatted before, then you're like, hey, do you want to fly this V-22? And you knew the background. You're kind of like, I can imagine what you're thinking. And so we discussed this when we were simming together a little bit, but
Yeah.
I'd love for you to start your overview and thought of coming into the V-22 community because I think it's just an interesting, perspective you have on it's just a very, very unique platform, and you have, you're very steeped in it from a very high level to now have you gotten in the plane yet? Or since
No.
since all right. Well, you did fly it at 204, and then you've been in the sim. You've been basically retraining in it. And hopefully soon you're getting back in the plane. But I just love to get your thoughts on that transition of kind of a very senior officer, pilot coming back. Maybe I don't know if were planning on it, but like coming back into the cockpit to a brand new aircraft where you kind of, in some ways, you have to kind of forget everything you knew to some degree. You can rely on your wisdom, but then kind of relearning it. So like that, what was that process like? You know, what do you got?
It was tough. And I'm mostly thinking about when I went through 204
Yeah.
2 summers ago. So part of the deal. So I finished up command on the East Coast and was recruited to go to the resourcing job, the requirements and resourcing job up in OpNav staff. And as part of that, I did the course at VMM T204 to learn the plane, the systems, get a chance to get my NATOPS check in it and just see how the plane flew. And I'll tell you, it was invaluable to do that. And I don't think I would have guessed that. I I think before I went through the 204 course, I would have said, hey, this is a good deal, but probably not necessary. The V-22 is so much different than any other plane. And to have the access to those sim instructors, those CSIs down in New River, to sit through the systems courses, to go through the simulators and see all the different failure modes. I mean, for goodness sakes, like the V-22 makes up new nomenclature. Prop rotor, that's not a thing. Before the V-22, that wasn't a thing. It's either a propeller or a rotor, depending on which
Yeah,
aircraft you're talking
yeah.
about or
Yep.
helicopter. But it's a prop rotor. It's a flaperon. It's a flap or it's an aileron. Like it's a flaperon. I mean, there's all these examples of components that they just combine because it is half helicopter, half airplane. It does both, and I'll tell you, it was very humbling to go through that because for one thing, you have at that point in my career, I had built the habit patterns. There were certain things that I just knew, right? Whether
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
IFR flying, whether it's formation flying, whatever. And you have to go back and you have to, you sort of knew what those were and had done them in several aircraft, and you have to dial that pretty far back, like back to the fundamentals of like API and aerodynamics, and start to question like, hey, what are we doing and why? And I'm thinking specifically like formation flying.
Yeah.
Formation flying in any other aircraft is, I'm not going to say it's straightforward, but once you get the hang of it, in a fixed wing
Yeah.
aircraft, it's translates into the other fixed wing
Yeah.
aircrafts more or
Yeah.
less. And,
Yep.
you know, in the V-22, there are a lot of danger areas, but in order to understand those, you need to understand the aerodynamics behind the plane. And that was very humbling to do that because it is not easy to understand those concepts. And that it's not just a fixed concept, that
Yeah.
the concept changes as you're in flight, as you tilt those big prop rotors back. So yeah, overall, I would say it was very humbling to go through that and to have to learn the new skills that some people had picked up. I never went through the helicopter syllabus down in Whiting Field for the Navy. I was a fixed wing pilot,
Yeah.
so in order to figure out how to hover, how to land at a specific point within point zero 0.03, I think is what the standards call for. And in order to sort of hit those parameters, you have to switch your way of thinking. I was used to flying at a certain airspeed, angle of attack, airspeed, flying the ball at the ship. I was used to flying, all these other things, and I thought that maybe the skill would translate, that I could lean on some of those skills, but I had to kind of dial it back and say, wait a second, this no, something's not right here. There's something else going on. And once you do that, I think, and you allow yourself to sort of accept that instead of just try and brute force it, you can get through it. But it's hard. It's
Yeah.
it's definitely hard.
What do you think are like the biggest differences for you, between when you fly in the C2 and then flying the V-22? What were the biggest things that you maybe gotchas or like, when you flew and you're like, oh shit, there's something, anything like that that you experienced?
That's tough. The C2 is like to me is like a jacket that just fits perfectly. Like, I know the systems, I know the failures,
Yeah.
there may be some gremlins, but I know what those gremlins are, whether they
Yeah.
rear their head that day or not. Um, I'm used to working with a crew in certain ways, so uh, I don't have a lot for you on that one. The V-22, I think just because of how it's engineered is uh, is tough, and I'm still learning that crew concept in the V-22 because it's the same concept, but it's a different skill set from what I've leaned on in the past, where
Yeah.
you're in a plane that and you understand the systems and you're doing that. And so I think one of the things that I'm still trying to figure out is expanding that boundary around. I'm trying to get my skill set to a point where in the simulator or in the plane um, I can perform at a level where now I can start to interact with my other crew members and tell them things that they need to know and then hear their responses, process them, and take action on them. That to me is something that needs to happen, but is also a lot more challenging. I think the dimensions in the V-22 and how we use the crew uh, is a lot different than what we do in the C2. It's C2 is more, I'll say two-dimensional, and the V-22 is more three-dimensional in terms of that crew integration.
Well, I said to most of the guys, once I was there for a little while and teaching, I was like, hey, this is a pitch, roll, yaw, and a thumb wheel. So I always say like, hey, this is adding a fourth dimension. So we're at four dimensions here, guys. So it's a new concept, and you need to just be ready to learn this and get comfortable in that uncertainty until you get that down. Because I would say any engineer that came through, not you exactly, but that more analytical mind, because you'd already been through 2 or 4, would be like, hey, ask a question about something, and I would pretty much every single question, I'd be like, well, that depends, and then I'd be like, go, and then they're just like, oh, I can't, they couldn't, they're like, and then they'd be like, they're like, they're probably like, this motherfucker doesn't know what he's talking about. I'm like, okay, I kind of could get that vibe, and I guess the class went on or whatever, and then they're like, oh, okay, he was right. So, um, but yeah, I thought that, that's the interesting part of like, it depends on, are you a helicopter? Are you, because it's a space helicopter. So are you a helicopter? Are you a plane? You know, where are, what's your, that, again, the decision making, did you lose the hydraulic, or was it the FCC, the flight control computer? Like it's those nuanced, and you always have to, yeah, go ahead.
You were the first person, so I didn't hear that fourth dimension with a thumb wheel until I came here. You were the first person to use that, and when you said that, it was like something clicked for me, and I was
Right,
like, "That is perfect. That is perfect." You're flying in three dimensions in other aircraft, and
right,
in the Osprey, it's a fourth dimension. It really
right.
is,
Yeah,
depending
yeah,
on the
that's
angle of your nacelle.
right. That's the thrust vector is, again, that's like, wait, thrust vector. So that's magnitude, like and you can control that plus the magnitude. And people are just like, man, like that just immediately blows people's minds a little bit. But yeah, so like my first squadron I was in, a group of captains, I think one of us coined ourselves as Young Money, and we just were like, and then the next peer group ahead of us in the squadron, these kind of senior captains, we were all first lieutenants. They were all 46 transitions, and so that was like, and then all the other senior guys, mostly all were, get from 46s, and so we definitely we thought differently of them at some times for the ability to handle the fourth dimension, because it did add
Sure.
on, and then you have, and then get into leadership and other stuff again. And then you have hubris, and they're like, I got this back when I was flying 46s, and I'm like, bro, that's like a $10 million Vietnam era helicopter. This is like $140 million space helicopter that flies three times as fast, so yeah, that's um I digress, but yeah. Is there anything in particular that comes to mind, like you'd like to talk about and share? I mean, Zen and call sign. So, do you have a call sign by chance?
Do. I haven't used it in years.
Oh, well,
So
yeah.
I was an admiral's aide, and the admiral that I worked for, this is my third tour, the admiral I worked for found out what it was and just looked at me and goes, "That's not appropriate. I'm not calling you that. I'm just going to call you Drew." And I said, "Okay." He says, "You shouldn't use that anymore." I had survived a few call sign review boards up until that point, but
Yep.
you know, I said, "Okay, that's fair enough," and just let it be.
Well, I bet he liked you then, because I think mine was between Radio from the movie Radio or Hank. So it's like either of them were like from, and Hank from Me, Myself, and Irene from so the guy who's schizophrenic. So I was like, I don't know. I thought the Hank one was perfect, and I played into that as well. So thank God, I'm happy for that.
Yeah, that's funny.
Um, so do you follow? Because again, very very smart, analytical mind. And so, do you follow any particular philosophy of, or way of thinking that has shaped how you have questioned things along the way, how you've been a leader to your subordinates? Now, do you have anything like that?
Boy, I don't think I have a formal philosophy. I think, you've used the term contrarian. I identify as a contrarian. And for me, I need to understand how things work. You know, I will take people at faith up to a point, but that there's a relatively short leash. And for people who I get, that I have buy-in from, that I trust wholly, and because we've been through some stuff together, and I've seen their decision making, I've seen their judgment, that leash is a lot longer, right?
Sure.
But I need to understand the why. I need to understand the things that are going into that, because I want to turn around and pass those things on. I don't I don't necessarily subscribe to that philosophy of leadership where you just say yes and you turn around and what's the other thing you're supposed to do? You're supposed to You're supposed to own the orders as if they're your own. Seriously, like that's so disingenuous. Does anyone care who the order's coming from? No, just say like this is what we're doing and here's where it's coming from. Like honestly, that's is it that hard? Are you really
Yeah,
supposed to make it your own? Like does anyone think that you're, most of the stuff that we do is so administrative in nature.
sure.
Do you really think that like some, chief or some, division officer is making this stuff up and saying like, well, we need to do a scrub on X or Y because no, it's
Yeah,
because somebody asked you to, or because it's in a regulation, but I mean, ultimately the scrub isn't what matters. It's, you're trying to help people out because you're trying to catch some, something, right? I mean, all these things have a reason why. So
right.
just doing things because somebody tells you to, not a huge believer in that. That got me into trouble. If you remember, there was a story I shared with you about going through some Marine training.
Right.
But that you know,
Well, yeah,
I I don't subscribe to that, but I do. I need to know the why, and I need to be able to
yeah,
turn around and explain it to other people, and
right.
that's what that's what keeps me going. That's what keeps me coming back.
I feel like it's like I feel like you put systems into your mind. You systematized leadership qualities, and you've made, like just from my experience with you, and I'm just thinking out loud here, like, and that's how you do it. Because, but I feel like you have more qualities, and I would say something more like, a stoic approach to leadership, right? Of like, yeah, one understanding what you can control, what you can't control, but then um, that's my thought on you and from my experience. But I feel like you have more stuff, and it's okay. You're not sharing, and you're because I think it is like it's nuanced, and you can't always describe something like that. You can't, and I think it's very hard to teach leadership. It's very hard. Like you have to experience. Maybe you have it innately, like you nurture first nature of like some people are naturally good leaders because they're empathetic to because right like hey, do you care, like do you genuinely care about them, or are you putting on a show because you can be seen through pretty rapidly. So
Yeah,
but yeah,
I I, I think you got to bring your genuine self to work. I'm a big believer in that. I think earlier in my career, I just kind of bounced around and did what I was supposed to and didn't really give it much thought. And at some point, after the first opportunity I had to get out, and I stayed in and I got, elevated to certain leadership positions. And I said, well, this is what a maintenance officer is supposed to do, or this is what an ops officer is supposed to do, or this is what, and I sort of thought of those examples that you're given or that you're exposed to, or that people sort of, rise up and initially that was sort of where I gravitated towards like, hey, this is what I should be doing. And so I tried to act the part. And at some point, I realized that didn't really work for me.
yeah,
And where you start to deviate from who you are, people see through that. Exactly what you just said. People and it, they don't respect that. It doesn't resonate with them. And so why are you doing it if that's the case? So you got to bring your authentic self to work, whoever that may be. You can't be scared of that person either. You just
yeah,
gotta. It may not be the textbook of you know whatever the perfect position or perfect trait or perfect whatever, but that's who you are. And if there's a trait that you're trying to work on, just be honest with people and say this is something I'm working on,
yeah.
and let them know that too. I
You
think
mentioned
that's yeah.
you mentioned as you were because you've been you're about 20 something years now, and you've mentioned at certain points where you thought of getting out, and then you're like, no, I'm getting out, and then they're like, here you go, here's a cool job, or here's something unique. Is that right to some degree?
Yeah, 100%. So I had written my resignation letter, was ready to get out of the Navy, and met my wife.
Mm,
So I, interestingly enough, the way the Navy dealt with, the promotion and the what's it called, the department head screen board at that point. And in my career, you didn't have to commit. And I was in this interesting position where I had been screened, I had been selected, but I hadn't committed because I didn't need to. And I did not intend on staying in. And I met my wife, Kathy. She was a JAG, and went on a few dates with her and told her, on our fourth date, I said, "Hey, looks like I'm heading to Norfolk, Virginia," which was on the other side of the country. I was here in San Diego, and she said, "Great, that'll be interesting to make that work." And I went, "Oh, okay. This is let's see where this goes." And then I had to do some deeper thinking about, like, why am I getting out? Why, what is really drawing me? And kind of realized there wasn't anything drawing me to get out. I just had a lot of dissatisfaction with the people that I was serving with, higher ups in particular, the people that were making ranks. There were some policies going on in the Navy that I definitely did not agree with.
Yeah.
One was called ERB, enlisted retention, and they cut a bunch of enlisted and basically broke their contract, and that to me was kind of a deal breaker. I was like, this is it. This is not the organization for me. And after meeting my now wife, took a look at it and said, well, there's a set of orders I want and a place I want, and it's a job I want, and it's pretty cool. So I can still get out after that. Why don't I just go do that?
Yeah.
And took the set of orders, and I'll tell you what, I had an absolute blast. I think part of it was I felt like I was on borrowed time. I had
Yeah.
no intention of staying in. I was just like, do what I want to do and do it my way. Do it. I'm not here to suck up or get a position or, for any sort of paperwork or anything. And it let me be, myself. And that was rewarding. And then the second time uh, was after my command tour. I had a chance to retire and planned on doing that. And there was an opportunity that popped up to get this transition to take a job up at the Pentagon and the resourcing requirements role. And there was the likelihood follow-on opportunity to come here to the wing, multi-mission wing, which is ultimately what I ended up selecting. And
Yeah.
that was something that I took once it was dangled in front of me as well.
Yeah, I think if more people think like that, what you said on borrowed time, but you're completely in the present moment, right? David Goggins type things, like you can't hurt me, because it's like, hey man, I don't like, I don't give a shit, but I also give a shit. Like I'm completely, and I think that if more people operated that way, they would find, like, hey, you met your wife. Like, is that a coincidence? Is it a synchronicity? Is it fate? Luck, right? So there's all those things that coalesce together, and I think that's the luck, like, right? You make your own, right? I'm like, I don't know. And I think it's fascinating because that type of thinking, you know, you live the dream, and you seem to, not always, but you seem to do almost exactly what you want to do. So interesting and well said. Do you have you have any experiences of, how you've operated as a leader in later on in your career, wherever, I mean, not even career, but maybe how you've been as a man, going into the Naval Academy, where because I think you're a pretty good dude, where you've been at somewhere later and somebody's been like, hey, thank you. Do you have any experience like that, of like kind of that karma coming back at you, of like how you've conducted yourself, as you've gotten it back later, it's been paid forward in some way?
Yes, but I'm not thinking of them, and you know, I'll think of them tonight, and I'll let you know what they are. I don't index my memories
Sure.
that way, but it's, honestly, it happens, from time to time, and somebody will come up and they'll say something. And I do remember one, one memory of somebody a decade after I'd been, well, you're a Marine, you you didn't go through this, but there's a basic leadership course that you go through, and some guy came up to me at Tailhook, and it was 10 years after I'd gone through this. It was like a nothing, like a 2 week leadership course. Like
Right.
it was absolutely like forgettable, right? Like, and I was just a student, there were, I don't know, 40 other students going through this. And this guy comes up to me at Tailhook. Remember, like I didn't have like, I, nothing on that was identifying. I'd ripped off my patches at that point. And, he comes up, he knew my name, he knew my background, he knew everything about me. And I'm looking at this guy and he looks familiar and he's like, you made this experience so, and I'm like, what are you talking about? And that was probably the most radical one of those. But yeah, there have been other times where people have come up and said, yeah, uh, that that I did things or helped them out in some way. And honestly, it's refreshing to hear that. It's nice, but I get my validation in the moment. I know that that's the right thing to do, and I move on, and I sort of forget about that. And so when those do come back, I don't spend a lot of time thinking about them. When they do come back, it's really nice to see that and have
Yeah.
that follow up.
Yeah. Well, I feel that way, and that's why we're talking right now, just so you know. Like, and I think that, again, I said before we started recording, is that I think if somebody is a fly on the wall to listen to conversations like this, to get an idea of who you are, who you really are, how you think about things, the sacrifices you've made, and being authentic always. Um, that again, you don't know. I don't know when I've had those same circumstances and kind of events happen, and I don't know when they're going to happen again. But I know that if I keep putting that out there, that it just is every moment. I like it. I think it builds upon itself. So anything comes to mind that you'd like to chat about? You got on your mind or interesting conversation? I mean, we've been chatting for about 50 minutes. You got anything good?
I would love to hear you talk about. So your wife is a medium.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, well, I would say, oh, hey, hold on. We'll get to that. But I'd like, so one more question for you
All
is,
right.
so we both have kids, and I have three kids. I think you have a young son, and the two, and a son and daughter. And how has that, I would say, if I was asking me, it's like, has that changed how you've been a leader or changed how you do things now, having two kids? And we've chatted before. I think, you're an incredible father, patient, loving. I see, and we've chatted about those things. How's that shaped you, fatherhood? How you do things now? Your wife being deployed, managing that stress, and mom's gone. You're working, have a lot of jobs. There's a kind of a lot of questions in there, but I'd love to get your thought on that. How do you juggle that?
Oof. I'll tell you, fatherhood, being dual mil, spouse in the military, all of those things have probably had a more profound impact on me than anything else in my career. And uh, I think what was nice was starting my exposure with marrying Kathy, starting with the dual mill, starting to get that female perspective of serving and seeing what those sacrifices are from the spouse perspective, and then starting to sort of put my toe in the water first with my daughter being born, and then with my son. We went into our relationship as co-parents, dual parents, saying we would both support the other one. She spent a majority of the time, early on supporting me in my career. And I had the chance to support her a little bit. She did some deployments with an ESG early on. And so, I took care of our daughter while she did that before our son was born. And, now to be that kind of single parent while my wife's deployed with two small kids, 7 and 4, It is a heavy lift, and I'll tell you that I don't look my aperture is completely changed when I go into the workplace and I see that single parent, for example, or that dual male couple. Um, I don't need to hear anything. I know what they're going through. I know the sacrifices because it's things that you can try and describe, but until you've lived them, there's just so many things that you have to deal with that affect your life. Whether it's just being alone, being a spouse, being whatever the case may be. I mean, there's so many dimensions there. And then you mentioned fatherhood and being a parent, and I'll tell you that I by the way, thank you. You're very complimentary. You I love how yeah. Um,
I'm just telling the truth, bro.
I that fatherhood is probably the hardest thing that I've done in my life.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And every day I feel like I get my butt kicked by these two little kids. I mean, my daughter is great now. She's 7. I think she gets me, and we've got a pretty good understanding. But my son is 4, and that little man, I mean, he does not, he and I don't speak the same language, and I'm trying to get
Yeah.
him over here on planet Earth, and he's off doing his own thing,
Yeah.
and that is frustrating. And I try to be patient, and I try to, you know, do the right things and say the right things, and it is incredibly hard. It is incredibly hard, and I can't express in words how much more it makes it when you're alone, when you don't have, when your spouse is gone, when you're dealing with that stuff, by yourself, and all these other factors come in, the poopy diapers and the screaming and everything else, and you're trying to stay calm and stay present, stay in the moment, and be that best father. Trust me, something falls out. Sometimes it's the best father, sometimes it's being patient, sometimes it's everything. So
Yeah.
it's tough for sure.
Yeah. Well, I get it. I mean, well, I don't get it as much because we had our third right as I was getting out, and Kelly had the 2 kids and was pregnant over my 2 deployments and my whole time in the Marine Corps. And I can only, I'm on the ship and like, hey baby, what's up? Just watching some movies today in the bunk, while we transit. um, or so yeah, it's a interesting, and it's a difficult perspective even just now of like remaining patient over the past, I was telling you, the past 45 or so days of being with the kids every single day, and you're just like, okay, hey, we can only bicker and argue uh 10 times today, and then I'm gonna get pissed, because it's like I can't like go to your room. I'm like, shit, we don't really have like, hey, so if you
Yeah,
guys do it 15 times, I know we don't spank anymore, but I'm gonna start spanking kids. Like I don't know what to do. I know I've used all my tools. Yeah. So, but yeah, that is
that
uh
I think that's a great parallel, and part of some of the stuff I've been dealing with recently was moving out here, while
yeah,
my wife was gone, while she was deployed, moving into a smaller house, and dealing with that, and yeah, like you have this toolbox, right? You build this toolbox of like things that you do, and then like all of a sudden it's like, wait, the space that I have is smaller, and I can't just separate, or I don't have that auditory privacy anymore because I can't just send the kids somewhere else to a different part of the house. Certainly in your situation,
yeah,
like it sounds like, your living situation, yeah, it's compressed, and those things, they create tension.
yeah, yeah. Finding equanimity as a parent, that's I sometimes I have a mantra of like patience, balance, equanimity, like intent, Blake, don't I because people accuse me of being intense. And I'm like, intensity level 1, like 1. So I don't know what they're talking about, but I try. Uh,
Yeah, you're
so,
definitely intense.
um, well, yeah, I don't know if this conversation is not really about me, but if you would like to inquire, what was your question?
So I've spent a lot of time thinking and sort of reflecting, and I feel like as I got to know you and as our conversation, would take different courses, you always threw me a curveball. I'm like, hey, by the way, I've got this other like part of my life, and then like you'd start to preview, and I'd be like, what is going on? I don't like, I think I know. I think I have you sized up, and then you go down another rabbit hole. Um, and towards the end there, you let me know that your wife Kelly she's a medium,
Yeah.
and uh, and I was curious if that is something she's going to continue while you're in Bali, and if that is and how she's planning on doing that, or um, what that
Yeah.
future is for
So
her.
yeah, she's been kind of working off and on since we've been out here when we've kind of had, been at a villa for a little while. So she's done most of her, obviously all of her work online. And I remember the first time she mentioned, she was like, yeah, like, she obviously meet people in person. It's obviously there's a personal connection there, and you're sitting across the table, a room or very close to somebody. And then she, had she was like, well, I'm gonna, doing some stuff over Zoom, and I'm kind of like, oh, really? Is that it works like that? And then it's just like and then as I, my analytical Neanderthal mind is like, I'm like, I don't get it. I don't get how is that? And then as I then have to, watch a lot of sci-fi and fantasy or something, or read some books, and I'm like, all right, I can kind of see the connection now. And that there is, I believe that there, like again, I don't know, I'm kind of going on a tangent, but there is something that I believe that there's something that connects us all. There is no need to have an umbilical attached to somebody else, and that there's something, call it the divine matrix, call it, a superposition, right? If we're all connected, we're connected some way, call it like that, that there's multiverses, there is this, I believe, a seemingly common connection. And so she has this sensitivity to it. And I think of it as like, so inside the brain, you have the pineal gland that has piezoelectric, more or less crystals in it. And it's like, in some ways, it's been described, and I'm not, totally versed in this, but that it's like an antenna. And, and some people have a very sensitive one where they are incredibly empathic, and they just have some ability to feel and sometimes see people's trauma, people's loved ones that have passed on, and there's no amount of distance that makes that type of connection relevant, right? Like it doesn't matter the distance. And so kind of like to your question, yes, she's still doing it, and that's how she does it, I guess. Um,
Wow.
yeah,
Yeah, I don't have a lot of experience in that, but I was immediately fascinated by it, and wondered how that sort of worked. If you needed a
yeah,
physical proximity to do that, if you needed, I think most of my exposure has probably been through Hollywood, so that's
sure.
not great, obviously, but
Yes.
um,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
So yeah, that's
uh,
good.
yeah, I will continue to be fascinated by that subject, and look forward to meeting her one day and
Yeah.
learning more.
Yeah, there were so many, because this was something that, when we first met, she's like, hey, Blake, just so you know, it's like met her, she went to CU, she was a journalism major, she, like, beautiful, carefree. We met basically right out of college. And, I'm like, hey, this guy, all good. And then she's like, hey, just so you know, there's like, I don't know, I've forgotten what she said. Like, I'm a little different. Like, I see, I can see people's loved ones, and I have these, I have this objective people sometimes, and I see this stuff, and I'm like, all right, cool. Like, hey, I love sci-fi, so that's great. I'm good at that. Um, yeah, that, it's because it was like, it's like it's easy to say is like, yeah, she just Googled you before. I'm like, dude, I wish it were that easy. We are. It's just it's like it can't, it's not that simple. And yeah, and just from the experiences, I actually had personally, the beginning of this year of for my first time, like I believed her, right? Or I had faith, or excuse me, maybe it's I had faith in what she did because I am just Neander. I'm like, this is it. Table, right? Got it. Yeah. There's the other stuff, my faith, like I believe in this other stuff, and I have faith. And then I experienced her ability firsthand, Blake Fisher, in my own mind. And I was just kind of like, oh, wow, wow. I like had that first time of experiencing it, and it was very, very profound, very unique. And yeah, it's like, like I'm like, all right, I still believe. All right, cool. I had faith, now I believe, and or whatever it was in there that kind of, yeah, it's very unique. And operating with radical transparency and truthfulness is the only way I could possibly operate, because when your wife is clairvoyant and or psychic or medium, like it's like there's no room for any silly funny business or from anything. It's like, I mean,
Yeah,
like it's hard to even surprise her about, so yeah, so that's about it. Yeah.
that's great. I didn't think about it that way, but
Yeah.
that's very refreshing.
Yeah. Yeah. um so yeah, man, we're at a little over an hour. Thank you for that question. That's good. I think it kind of ties into the whole, this whole conversation. And yeah, a little bit, share a little bit about me, which I mean, I'd like to think I'm an open book most of the time, but maybe a page at a time. Like, oh, you want to see a new page?
You're definitely a page at a time kind of guy. You got to come with the questions, and then you sort of
Sure,
share. You dole it
sure.
out a little bit at a time.
All right. Well, is anything you want to kind of? Was this a good conversation? Thank you. Anything you want to kind of share with, or any safe rounds or anything like that?
I appreciate the chance to connect.
Yeah.
I texted a little bit with you after you left, and thank you so much for reaching out. And this has been very energizing for me because
Oh,
I've really enjoyed the connection that we've shared, and look forward to keeping in touch with you. This is phenomenal. Thank you.
feeling was mutual. Thank you. I mean, that's why you're here. I feel like you're rare, and I appreciate that friendship and the dialogue and the rapport we have. Thank you. Thanks for coming on. All right.
Definitely.
All right. I'm gonna end the recording.